Hey everyone, this is Mike Wolf and welcome to the Spoon Podcast. My guest on the show today is Lloyd Cohen, who is the CEO of a company called Now Cuisine, a maker of food robots, food assembly robots, and just last week, Adam's company announced a partnership with a Texas-based quick service chain called Freebird's World Burrito. And the plan is between the two companies is that they will deploy 6 different food robots through different locations in the Dallas market. Not at actually the restaurant, not at Freebird's, but in different places like apartment buildings or in cafeterias. And these food robots will be branded Freebird's and will make burrito bowls to be served at these automated robotic kiosks that they're calling takeout stations. So you can hear all about that. But actually, the more fun part of the conversation is just hearing a little bit about Adam's background and how he went from being a very successful 3D printing industry executive to creating this robot. And going back even further than that, we hear about Adam's college days where he's in Paris making a documentary about the early days of automation and robotics, eating great food at night. And he has an idea strikes him. How can food and robots come together to help democratize and put great food in the hands of a lot of different people? And so this was an idea he had almost 40 years ago. It was an idea that he abandoned a little bit as he went off and started a very successful career in 3D printing, filed a bunch of patents, sold a company, and almost 4 decades later, he revisits the idea and starts building this robot. Now it's getting towards actually launching this thing. So we had that conversation. I'd actually written an article about Adam's story at the Spoon last week, but we recorded this after that story had went out because I wanted to do a podcast with Adam. So you kind of get the audiobook version of the story in a way. So I hope you enjoy it. Before we get to the podcast, to the conversation, I just want to tell you real quickly about Smart Kitchen Summit 2021. It will be November 9th and 10th. Just go to smartkitchensummit.com. We have some great speakers lined up, many of which we'll be announcing the next couple of weeks. And also, if you are interested in going to CES, the biggest tech conference really in the world, the Spoon will be powering the food tech programming there. So if you're interested in that, or if you want to actually exhibit in the CES food tech area, just drop us a line, sponsor at thespoon.tech. We can talk to you about that as well. So, all right, folks, that's it for now. Let's get to the conversation with Lloyd Cohen. Hey, well, I'm here with Lloyd Cohen, the CEO of Now Cuisine. Adam, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing, Mike?
I'm doing well. You are in Texas where you are building a food robot. You just struck a deal with Freebird's, the company well known in through Texas for their Mexican food. But I want to kind of hear how you got the idea for building a food robot. It started quite a while ago.
Yes, it started back in 1985 when I was in Paris working on a documentary film on the early history of robotics.
Okay, so that sounds awesome. Like, I would love to have gone to Paris and make a documentary about food robots. Why did you decide to do that, and how did you get that deal?
Well, I discovered this topic called automata, which are the lifelike robots that people have been trying to make since antiquity, and which sort of peaked in the 18th and 19th centuries, and was able to drum up some funding at MIT to go off and do this documentary.
Okay, you're at MIT, and were you majoring in technology? What were you doing at MIT?
I was actually majoring in physics, and but I had a strong interest in robotics, and therefore was in the library looking at books on robotics and discovered a book called Robots, 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 and figuring it must be about robots, I opened it up and found a chapter on these antique automata.
And you were able to raise money, go to France, and you're sitting in Paris, probably eating good food. And at some point you came up with this idea like food robots. Talk about that. How you had this aha moment.
Yeah, I mean, it was basically realizing that the food that I was eating was not something that most people could easily access. And I wanted to somehow democratize access to really high-quality food that would be otherwise too expensive or otherwise unavailable because you would need very skilled preparation. So the idea of somehow applying automation and robotics to the task occurred to me back then. I came up with the term, cuisine machine, but that's as far as I got in those days. This is 1985, and so I kind of backburnered it. Always wanted to go back to it, and then and didn't for a while.
Yeah, I mean, you're young. You're just getting started on a career. You probably didn't have a lot of money at that point. So, and quite honestly, robotics were much different than back then. Like, they're not the AI powered, amazing machines they are today. They were a much different thing back then. So you probably, you backburned and started a career.
Yes, I did. And you're right. Robotics in those days were, kind of, big, heavy, dangerous machines that would work in factories doing things, and not much else. But so, yeah, I got involved, fortunately, in the 3D printing industry at its very beginning, and made my career primarily building, bringing to market basically a number of different 3D printing technologies, including the first ever 3D printer.
So those are early days for 3D printing in the 80s. Now they seem commonplace, but back then that was super early. And so you got involved. I think you went to work for one of the big two, 3D Systems, right? Eventually?
Yes, 3D Systems pioneered the industry, and I was, fortunate enough to be involved very early. And as I said, their first commercial machine, which was called the SLA 250, I led the team that brought that to market, and it was a very successful product, actually.
So it was a great time to get into like an earlier industry, helped to pioneer it. And I think at some point you were teaching, you did some research and came up with some original ideas. And didn't you found a company around some of your own ideas?
Yeah, I found it, between 3D Systems and doing that, with some other folks from 3D Systems, we went off to MIT and convinced them to license their technology exclusively in a particular field of use to a few guys in a garage, literally. And they did. And that technology was actually called 3D printing. It was a specific technology.
And so you eventually went and founded your own company. So you were an entrepreneur, you raised money, and I think you eventually even sold it. So tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, yeah, the company that we took that 3D printing technology to market, MIT's technology, we went public with it pretty early, and eventually I wound up leaving, and I went off into academia for the first time at USC. And while there, I, with some DARPA funding, developed a technology that was very different. It was a metal 3D printing technology that was capable of mass production and also capable of extraordinarily small features and very high accuracy. And so I spun that off into a company that I founded back in the 91 timeframe. No, I'm sorry, not 90, 2000 timeframe.
2000 timeframe.
Yeah.
I'm surprised you never did a 3D food printing machine, like given the interesting, like the intersection of 3D printing and food, but maybe that's like in the future for you.
Well, perhaps, I actually think that there's still a long way to go in that,
right.
In that area.
I do too. I wish there was more innovation there, and 3D Systems kind of dabbled in it, but they never really, I felt, take it too seriously. But that's not really what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about food robots. And so you have this successful career, you ultimately sell your company. That would be enough for most people, but you kind of had this idea kind of niggling at the back of your brain. So like you never let go of the idea of a food robot, did you?
No, I really didn't. Yeah.
So talk about that. So it's 25, 30 years later, 35 years later, and you're probably looking around. I mean, I think, you told me you started working on this around 2018 or so. So nearly 35 years later, and food robotics and robotics just generally have moved a lot further along. Companies are raising money. So were you kind of looking around what's happening, and maybe that kind of encouraged you to get back in it?
Yeah, I started hearing about people working in the area, some of the early players. And I asked myself, first of all, I realized, of course, that the time has come to do something because technology has come to a certain point where it's feasible. And then I asked myself, how best to do it, starting to really consider what is required for a successful approach. And what I concluded pretty early on is that you had to really treat the ingredients super well so that the quality of the food was optimized. And secondly, that I thought that it was very important that you can somehow make sure that the machine and the food don't come into direct contact. And so I figured out a way to do that. And
can you explain that to me? Because I'm trying, when you say machine and food, I mean, if the robot is essentially making food, right?
Yeah.
Talk about how that's possible and why it's important.
Well, I can talk about more why it's important than how I'm doing it.
Okay.
Why it's important is several things. One is that, if you have the machine in direct contact with the food, then you have residues that can remain on the machine, which can lead to food safety issues, can lead to cross-contamination issues.
Yep.
Cross-contamination, let's say that you have an allergy to something, you don't really want to buy food from a machine that had that in it because you're at risk. Also, you either have to provide for extensive cleaning of the machine that is manual, or you have to do it somehow automatically, and both of those are problematic. If you try to do it manually, it means that you're going to spend a lot more time at the machine, and you probably also need to have the machine in particular locations where there are facilities for cleaning, like a 3-compartment sink, for example. That limits where you can put these machines. And then if you try to do it automatically, well, then you need a water hookup and you need a drain in most cases. And that, again, limits you tremendously on where you can put the machines and how quickly you can deploy them. So there's a number of good reasons for avoiding that contact.
And so that kind of leads us to maybe a good time to talk about like what the machine is and where you're putting them, right? So you started tinkering on an idea, started building a machine, and, you announced it this week. And what struck me is these things look like they're completely self-sufficient. I mean, in that they can stand alone in like an apartment complex, or they can go into an office building, and like there's not like a person there cleaning after every bowl of food is made. So kind of getting back to your idea of like the machine not coming in contact with the food, you wanted these things to basically sit in places that are not restaurants, and act independently, provide people food. Kind of getting back to your idea of democratized food production in different far-flung locations.
Yeah, that's correct. The idea is that the machine is unattended. It's only accessed for refilling, which is something that will take place every, say, 2 to 3 days. And that process of restocking it is very efficient as well. And the idea is to get basically restaurant food to people where they already are, rather than say, well, if you want this food, you have to come to the restaurant, or you need to pay someone to bring the food to you. And that's what we're trying to get away from with this concept that I generally call distributed dining.
And so the distributed dining takeout station, I think you call them takeout stations, within the context of the new announcement, they are making food from essentially fresh scratch ingredients. Talk about like how what's happening inside the machine. Yeah.
So a good way to think about it is if you were to walk into a Freebirds, let's say, you would find two activities. Behind the counter, there are people who have ingredients that have been prepared, and they're assembling them into a meal for you, based on your specific requirements. And they're, of course, also doing the transaction to pay for the meal. What you don't see as easily is what goes on in the kitchen, where things are being sliced and diced and sautéed and all that. The way that, the state of food robotics is such that it's difficult to do all of that in one machine. And so what we're doing is we're partitioning those functions between human beings and then automation. And so the kitchen activities are still going to be done, at least in the near term, by human beings in a restaurant context in most cases, or perhaps a ghost kitchen. Whereas the stuff that goes on behind the counter, assembling the meal from those ingredients, plating it, doing the transaction, that can all be done remotely, entirely by robotics.
Okay, and so the cooked chicken or whatever, and the sliced vegetables, those are put into a machine every couple days, and then when someone comes up and punches in their order, they're essentially getting an assembled bowl of food?
Yeah, that's pretty much correct.
Okay, so you realized it's time, and I assume you're fairly technical. Did you just start tinkering? Like, how did this thing come together? How did you get started on kind of building it?
Yeah, well, I first, as I said, started thinking about what's the right way to do it, and I came up with some initial idea. I started, filing patent applications on that. I then decided I'm going to build a prototype. I built a prototype, and then realized that the approach I was using had a number of issues, and basically tore it all apart and started again. And I built what I called an alpha machine at the time, which basically demonstrated that my approach worked. Then sometime later, I realized, I haven't gone far enough. I need to actually show that this works in public, serving food to people, and do an actual beta program that allows people to access the food, to experience it, and to really demonstrate the technology. So I kind of shoehorned into that alpha machine what became a beta machine, which I actually did bring out into public. And it took a long time to do that shoehorning, and there were some compromises that were made because it wasn't intended from the get-go to be a machine that would go out into the world. But I was able to do that, and we had a successful public beta in which people sampled the food. They loved it. They loved the experience and the convenience, and it was really, really good food too.
So you put it out in the world. You ran a beta, and people just came up and ordered the food. Where was this? Did you have what location?
Yeah, so we had 2 co-working spaces in Dallas that participated in that, and the machine went from one to the other. And
was the beta running for a period of like a couple months?
No, it was shorter than that. It was about 3 weeks total.
Okay, and was it unattended? Were you there hovering in the background the whole time, or were you comfortable leaving and letting your food machine operate without you there?
No, I actually had to attend it for a couple of reasons. One is that the beta wasn't really intended as a machine that could be fully operational. It didn't have the ability to do a transaction, for example. So I had to be there, scanning people's or swiping people's credit cards. And it also had a very low capacity, only a capacity for 8 meals. So a machine that is actually unattended needs to have a much greater capacity.
Yeah, and I think so. Your new one, from my understanding, will build like up to like 2 or 3 dozen bowls a day, right? Is that kind of like the rough? Yeah,
3 or 4 dozen a day, and as I said, be restocked every 2 to 3 days.
Okay, so you have enough capacity to do like 50, 60 meals. You load the food in, and obviously you built in like the ability to pay with a credit card with the new one, and that's kind of the plan.
Well, yeah, the new one, just to be clear, isn't yet built,
okay.
But it will absolutely allow for payment, by conventional means, both NFC and credit card.
So you had this one, you do a public demo, and then you went out and started talking to folks. You struck a deal with Freebirds, which, like we talked about earlier, is a taco chain in Texas. I think they have like a few dozen taco locations, or both.
They consider themselves, Texas number one burrito.
Texas burrito. Okay.
Yes, and they call themselves Freebirds World Burrito. Okay. But they do have tacos as well. But I think they focus more on burritos, either the rolled kind or the bowl kind.
And so there's this deal where you basically struck where you actually will have some of your food robots in partnership with Freebird distributed in 6 different locations, I think, through is it the Dallas marketplace?
Yeah, we're going to start in Dallas. Freebirds is based in Austin, but has a lot of presence in Dallas and, in fact, throughout Texas. And we're, of course, based in Dallas.
And so the idea is these will not be like at a Freebirds physical retail location. It'll be like a multifamily unit. It might be in an office building, places where you normally couldn't get Freebirds, but you can order food.
Yeah. So you're correct. The machines will not be at a Freebirds unit. They will be in locations where people want food. So we believe that a good place to start would be multifamily buildings, in other words, condos and apartment buildings, and also office buildings. But the potential for all sorts of environments is there, especially since the machine really only requires electricity and enough space. And I'm not talking about a huge amount of space. I'm talking, 20 to 25 square feet.
And so you are going to be raising funds for these 6 units that'll be deployed through Dallas. Talk about that. Do you have like an idea? Are you going to go through crowdfunding, like equity crowdfunding, like we're seeing a lot of other food robotics companies using a start engine, or are you going to go raise some money through venture capital? What is the plan?
There really are 3 options. There's venture capital, there's crowdfunding, and there's angel investors. And I'm looking at all 3. I haven't completely solidified my strategy, but I would say that crowdfunding, although I've been invited by one major platform to start with them, I'm not probably going to start with them, but I may use them to fill out the round.
It does seem like a lot of organizations, Waymaker, for example, and their kind of collective of robotics, do use equity crowdfunding quite a bit. Why has it become so popular to use equity crowdfunding in the food robotics space?
Well, I think part of it might be that if you try to raise money from some investors, they may not like the fact that it is potentially capital intensive because it involves hardware. And some of them are, you might say, allergic to hardware in that they're used to making good returns on software-only companies. But the other reason I think would be that it allows them to have a whole bunch of champions in the field, because the people who invest in your company through crowdfunding are almost automatically going to be enthusiastic about your product. So I think those are 2 compelling reasons to do it. And I guess the third would be you don't put someone on your board of directors if you crowdfund, and perhaps it gives, therefore, the entrepreneur a little bit more control.
Yeah, you likely retain much more control. You're not giving a board seat away. That makes a ton of sense. And so you're going to be raising funds and ultimately building this. Right now, I think you were the technical team basically for the entire build of that first what became the beta version. How do you kind of see your company evolving over time as you build out these first 6 models? Are you expanding your team?
Well, absolutely. I'm already starting to recruit folks, and we want to get in, head of engineering, head of sales, and of course a bunch of engineers. We'll probably wind up with about 6 or 7 people to embark on the project of building this next generation commercial machine.
And the ultimate machines you build, like they're fairly tailored towards the partner, right? So this one will be branded Freebirds, and it'll make breedables, but it doesn't have to be that way. It sounds like you have some flexibility. It can make other types of bowls. It doesn't have to be breedables. Talk about like the design of the machine and kind of the ability for you to customize around whoever the partner is.
Yeah, absolutely. The first machines that we put out there will be capable of doing food in a bowl-based format, which is, of course, burrito bowls. It's grain bowls. It's potentially noodle bowls, rice bowls, poke bowls, acai bowls, anything that is served that way. And we can, brand the machine with the particular partner that we're working with at that time. And really the only thing that changes are the ingredients that go in the machine and the digital recipes that the machine executes.
I'd love to kind of hear where you see this idea of distributed dining go. I think you may have trademarked that term. It kind of goes along with this idea you had like back in the 80s. And you have seen guys like, DoorDash. I think I'll edit this out. Was it DoorDash that acquired Chowbotics? I'm trying to remember.
Yes, it was.
Okay. Well, so I'll edit that. You've seen guys like DoorDash acquire Chowbotics. And so they're obviously thinking about, hey, how can we get food in more places? We don't always have to deliver everything. So clearly this idea of distributed dining and having unattended food creation is something that's starting to resonate. Do you think this is something that ultimately becomes very widespread?
I think it can. I'm not saying that it's going to supplant restaurants, because there are still going to be many people who would like to have the social experience of going to a restaurant or just going out into a new environment as opposed to eating where they are. But you have to balance that against the tremendous and apparently growing desire for convenience and for doing things quickly and still getting a healthy meal. So, you have a lot of trends that are working in this direction, from the consumer point of view. People want better food, They want healthier food. They want it fast. They don't want to pay through the nose to get it, all that kind of thing. And at the same time, you have a number of, restaurant issues that are becoming very important, such as labor is becoming, hard to get and expensive. Restaurants have been struggling to deal with the high costs of third-party delivery, particularly. Restaurants have even classically had problems that aren't going away. Like, they want to expand. How do they do that? They go and buy or rent a new piece of real estate, and they assume a tremendous amount of risk in doing that, and not to mention the capex that they have to deploy.
Yeah, and just generally, if you look at, for example, office environments, right, you've seen a move towards better, fresher options, rather than like if you were to like 20 years ago, it was that we've all seen the vending machine with the stale bag of chips, but you started to see, 5 years ago, companies like Byte and some of these kind of IoT powered fridges offering some fresh options. You've seen companies bringing in, IoT technology and kind of contactless payment to allow you to buy different and better options. And now it's a logical evolution to me. You would just start to see food assembly in these machines from fresh ingredients. And so it does seem like there's just an evolution towards more evolved and better choices using technology, whether that's through IoT or robotics.
Sure, absolutely. And I think that companies like Byte, demonstrated that the demand is there for fresher food. And out of a traditional vending machine, you'll be lucky if you get something that has been sitting there less than about 4 or 5 days, and it degrades tremendously, particularly something like a sandwich, which we're not doing, at least at this point. But you can imagine how much a sandwich degrades in that much time, because things interact with each other, right? The bread absorbs moisture from the other ingredients and things. So, restaurants don't make all the meals for the week ahead of time and then just wait for the customers. They put them together as they're demanded, and the quality is therefore very high.
So you said that you'll move beyond bowls. What other types of foods are you envisioning your machines to make?
Well, without revealing too much of our roadmap, I think that we will probably be able to go after bowls to things like tacos, and I did mention sandwiches that might be coming at some point, but there's some other options as well that I can't really talk about at this point.
All right. Well, Adam, it's great to see someone who had this vision almost 40 years ago, went off and had a successful career, and is getting back and executing on it. I'm excited to watch where your company goes. So where can people find out more about what you're building?
Well, probably the best way is to go to nowcuisine.com, one word. And from there's some resources. And there's been a fair amount of press that's come out in the last couple of days on our deal with Freebirds. That is another potential resource.
All right. Adam Lloyd Cohen, the CEO of Now Cuisine. Thank you so much for spending time with me.
Thank you very much, Mike. It's my pleasure.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. If you are building your own food robot, or if you're looking to deploy one, or if you're just interested in the backstory about how someone built a new piece of technology, I thought it was a good conversation. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We'll talk to you next week.